Greetings, everyone. This is Hagar Munsif, a researcher at the African team of the Asia-Africa Democracy Forum 2021. It is such a pleasure to present today the assessment of North Africa region in defending and promoting democracy and civic space with the SDGs in the light of COVID-19 pandemic. Let us directly now go to our presentation, but first, let me highlight the main components so you can follow up with me. The AADF North Africa presentation will consist of 5 main sections. The first section will tackle the SDGs in the region. The second one will tackle COVID-19 situation in the region. The third one will tackle democracy, civic space, and freedoms. The fourth one will tackle CSO engagement. And finally, I will try to present some recommendations that may help the region to move forward. At the beginning, let me tell you that North Africa region consists of 7 main countries: Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, Tunisia, and Western Sahara. With a special case of Western Sahara, as the UN does not consider it as a sovereign state, however, the African Union considers it as a sovereign state, and there is a political conflict between Morocco and Western Sahara on this. If you'd like to know more about this case, kindly check the annex of the region's report. Let us now move to the first section. Section 1, the Sustainable Development Goals in North Africa. At the beginning, I would like to give you just an overview on the development of SDGs implementation in each country from 2016 till 2021 based on the SDSN index data. Looking at the chart that we do have, we will find that Algeria had good development from a score around 58 in 2016 to 71 in 2020, with being on the top 70 around the world. Morocco coming close to the Algerian case, but having a score of 70.5 in 2021. Tunisia also taking positive steps forward, being the first African country on the international rank. Egypt with less development, around 8% only from 2016 to 2021. And Sudan, which is considered the worst situation regarding SDGs, as until 2021, the country's score is still less than 50%. And the country's ranking is continuously decreasing, making Sudan at the very bottom of the list. To analyze this data on the sub-regional level, we can say that the Maghreb countries, which are in our case Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, made the best achievements in the region. But why? The Maghreb region seems to have 2 positive features that supported the implementation of SDGs in a progressive manner. The first one is institutional arrangement and responsibilities for the steering, coordination, and monitoring of SDGs. As an example, Algeria created a new coordination and consultation structure named Interministerial Committee for the Coordination and Monitoring of SDGs. Morocco had a governance framework was established from the management and monitoring of the Sustainable Development Implementation, comprising 2 committees. One that is headed by or chaired by the head of the government with the political and strategic guidance role, and the other hand, a steering committee with the Secretary of the State to give more technical support. Tunisia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs provides political leadership, while the Ministry of Development and Investment provides technical coordination and oversees the SDGs, National Plan, and VNR process. So, as you see, there is a more defined framework with organized tasks and shared responsibilities. The second reason why the Maghreb countries came on the top of the list was the regional cooperation. The regional cooperation is set to play a central role in the implementation of Agenda 2030. Those countries has the Arab Maghreb Union, the AMU. The AMU has therefore played an important role in accompanying its member countries in implementing and monitoring 2030 Agenda and 2063 Agenda 2. I now bet you're wondering, but what about Libya and Western Sahara? Unfortunately, no information available for both countries because of the unique situation that was mentioned about the Western Sahara and the complicated situation that Libya is currently witnessing. So This was an assessment on the sub-regional level, and now we will assess the North African region in regard to the whole African continent. If we studied that, we will find out that only North African countries were on the top of the 90 countries around the world, with Tunisia, as we mentioned, as the first African country. Bearing in mind that 38 African countries were from the least 50 countries around the world, which makes them the majority. Only Sudan from the region was included in those 38 countries. And finally, there is around 30% of missing information in the region, which is considered a high percentage of unavailable data compared to other African regions, as an example, Southern Africa. But again, why do North African countries have better SDGs ranking than the rest of the African continent region? After studying this question, we found out that the North African region has better education systems with less terrorist groups, in addition to less external intervention. Therefore, the North African region had more chances to implement sustainable development than the rest of the region. However, it is worth mentioning also that the North African region had the least SDG 13 implementation. And this is in the whole, compared to the whole continent. One reason behind that is that the North African region have more industrial sector with less forests and green areas than the rest of the African countries, where the governments usually take care of because it is used as a sort of tourism that brings money to the countries. So now we've tackled the North African region and then the North African region on the African continent. But what about the SDGs implementation in North Africa versus Asia and on an international level? It may seem that North Africa region have a good development indicators. However, compared to Asia or internationally, the region is still far behind with serious challenges in SDGs 2, 3, 8, and 14. Compared to the Asian continent, the SDGs implementation is much better in Asia, having Japan, Republic of Korea, and Thailand with very high achievements and success stories that the African continent and North Africa can learn from. Let us now go to the national mechanisms on SDGs. All countries in North Africa have national SDGs plans. However, the national plans face many obstacles, as well as we will see now. 6 out of 7 countries had their national plans as the main legislation for implementation of SDGs. Only Algeria was the country that had the constitution as a main legislation, where they recently added some items to support the implementation of the SDGs. The first country to have a national plan was Tunisia, with a period from 2015 to 2020. Then came Egypt, Sudan, and Morocco, had common periods from 2016 to 2030. Algeria had the longest plan from 2019 to 2035, and latest and shortest plan was the Libyan one from 2020 to 2022. Talking about the common assessment of the national plans, let me tell you that some of the plans didn't use Agenda 2030 as a reference, which make it harder to identify the real insufficiencies or the real achievements. Others didn't include specific targets or indicators at the Libyan plan, and this makes it hard to understand to what extent the government had succeeded in implementing the plan without indicators or targets. The strategies also use different namings for the pillars. So just instead of using targets and indicator, they used strategic focus, framework, program, stake. So this also, I consider it as an obstacle. Furthermore, the strategies concentrated on the general division of the development themes more than the specific ones, which makes it also harder to measure the real efforts that has been done. Regarding the reliability of the information of the national plans or even the VNRs, we can find three main points. The first one is no proof-oriented achievements. The national plans and BNRs talked a lot about the achievement and the positive effect of the government's effort in improving the citizens' life, but with no proof on that. Neither news or international studies are compatible with the positive information that the government presents. And let me tell you that this reflects the general mentality of the government in North Africa region. Number two, too much theoretical information. The national plans and BNRs contain too much theoretical information to the extent that one can get lost with the theoretical stuff. Sometimes also not reliable information. This can reflect the insufficiency of the results and failures of the governments to present reliable proof-oriented information. It is worth mentioning in this part that Egyptian and Sudanese BNRs and national plans were considered the best reports compared to the region's reports. The third point is that the report states participatory approach, but with no reflection on the participatory input. There is no data about the different stakeholders who participated in the reports and plans. On the contrary, Algeria stated that the methodology of collecting the data, which is good. Morocco has specialized agencies, and it stated that in the national plans, which is also considered a positive point. Okay, regarding prioritizing the SDGs, how did the national plans and the BNRs prioritize the SDGs? I found two interesting points. The first point is the SDGs neglection. There was no enough attention to the SDG 16 and 17, which are considered two very, very important SDGs specifically to the North African region. Also, there was a notable neglection in SDG 14 regarding life below water. The final point is that different focus in national plans than in BNRs. So let me tell you, in the national plans, the governments concentrated more on the pillars that attract citizens, like poverty, education, health. However, the BNRs concentrated more on pillars that attract the international community, as gender equality and business innovation, climate change, and that's it. So in conclusion, in this part, the steps of having national plans is a good one, but the government still have obstacles to make sure that those plans are transferred from just ink on the paper to the real work on the ground. From Agenda 2030, we will concentrate on three main SDGs: SDG 5, SDG 10, and SDG 16. Starting with SDG 5. All North Africa countries still did not achieve remarkable improvement regarding SDG 5. The majority of the countries have severe problems, marking them either in the red zone or the orange zone in the SDSN index. Algeria and Tunisia have better ranks, marking them in the orange zone. However, they still face significant challenges. After studying the situation of SDG 5 in North Africa, I found out that there is top 4 common challenges for the implementation of SDG 5 in North Africa. Early marriages, domestic violence, marital rape, and reservations on the Sdgs. It is obvious that the common challenges are those related to what's so-called in the Arab region honor cases, which are the situations related to the sexual life of women and the cultural norms. Moreover, the main achievements were regarding the professional life and the public participation of the women, which are the achievements that can be translated to numbers and presented to the international community. Deeper research also has shown that most of the achievements had no practical effects, as the daily life practices and cultural norms are still dominant in North Africa. Moving to SDG 10, we still couldn't see any remarkable improvement in SDG 10 in North Africa countries, with a complete lack of information in Libya as a major challenge. Sudan faces the worst situation with major challenges in implementation of SDG 10 based on the SDS and index. Algeria has the best situation in the region regarding reducing inequalities, while still have challenges remain. Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia face significant challenges in this matter, as you can see from the chart. From the previous information and from also studying the reducing inequalities in North Africa, I can highlight for you the 4 top common challenges, which are social injustice, economic opportunities inequality, high poverty rates, and income inequality. This can be analyzed through mentioning that, number 1, North Africa countries have huge gaps between social levels, with increased rates in low social levels and limited in high social ones. The median levels are decreasing, which is considered a serious threat to the stability of the community. Secondly, the 4 top common mentioned challenges presented vital reasons of the uprising that were witnessed in most of the North African countries 10 years ago, and that led to the overthrow of their leaders. However, 10 years after, the region is still facing those challenges. Finally, high corruption rates can explain the failure of the region's government to implement SDG 10. And now, moving to my favorite goal, SDG 16, promote just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. Well, SDG 16 is facing also major challenges in a conflict-prone region, which is North Africa. And while studying the situation of SDG 16 implementation, I couldn't highlight only 4 top challenges because there are a lot. So moving between political instability, political repression, need for economic reforms, terrorist acts, external conflicts, human rights violations, high poverty rates, high corruption rates, high women violence rates, ongoing armed conflict in Libya, and absence of security, even human trafficking, high number of rebel groups, illicit armed trades. So all of those symptoms are challenges to implement SDG 16, having a peaceful society in North Africa. So obviously North Africa is facing huge challenges with less achievements in implementing peaceful societies and justice. Moving quickly to the link between SDGs and human rights. Let us start with the Universal Periodic Review, the UPR. The top SDGs recommendations are as shown in the chart during the UPR 3rd cycle. We can see that SDG 16, the one that we've just been mentioning, is the first common SDG, followed by SDG 5, also that we were tackling about gender inequality. This may be explained by the conflicts, the corruption, the human rights violations that are spread in the North Africa region. The rest, top 3 SDGs vary from SDG 4, 8, and 10. The corruption may explain the focus on SDG 10, especially that North Africa countries are full of rich resources with unequal benefit distribution. The lack of SDG 4 and SDG 8 can be linked together in countries that are known for high illiteracy rate around the world, also preventing girls from education, and poor public education systems, which normally will lead to the lack of decent working conditions, which is SDG 8. The Human Rights Council membership. All countries in the North African region have participated in the Human Rights Council membership before, and currently there are 2 countries from the region that are members in the Human Rights Council, the HRC, Libya and Sudan. But let us stop here and talk about those 2 particular countries where they raise a huge question mark for me. Specifically, human rights situation in those countries are suffering with very low ranks of democracy, civic space, and freedom. So how come the representatives of those governments, which actually have severe human rights problem, contribute to the improvement of the global human rights situation? It is well known that each and every government around the world conduct human rights violations. This is something that is well known. But in the Libyan and Sudanese case, we're not talking about a violation or two. We are talking about a negative general situation. And this reflects the insufficiency of the criteria of the Human Rights Council membership that were mentioned in Resolution 6251 and calls for the need of the development and modification of those criteria, either to have membership that can include countries to improve their capacities or to limit the countries, the membership of the countries that can prove assisting in promoting human rights. So this is a problem. Now, talking about the treaty bodies mechanism. So if we compare the participation of the North African countries in the treaty bodies based on the countries as shown in the chart, we will find that Morocco is the only country that ratified all the treaties. Good job, Morocco. Sudan is the least country ratifying on the treaties, and Sudan is the only country in the region that did not ratify the CEDAW. If we're talking about the reporting, as we can see in the late report part in the chart, we will see that Libya is the first country having late reports that are not submitted. And Tunisia is the best country in the region regarding presenting reports on time. Good job, Tunisia, too. If we compare the participation of the North Africa countries based on the treaties, the type of the treaty itself, we will note some interesting facts. First, that Tunisia is the only country that ratified and reported to the Committee of Enforced Disappearances. Sudan and Morocco only ratified to the treaty but did not report, and this situation reflects that the region has serious threats of enforced disappearances. Also, most of the countries were late in submitting the reports to the treaty body regarding economic and social rights than the Committee of Against Torture, the CAT, Committee Against Torture. So those two committees were, the North African countries did not report to them in a good way. Talking about the special procedures, well, only Libya and Tunisia in the region, the North African region, have standing invitations. And if we can see the dates of the standing invitations in March 2012 in Libya and February 2011, you will see that those dates were sensitive periods for both countries, so having a standing invitation was a positive point. For the visits of the special procedures, let us say that since 1998, the highest number of completed special procedure visits were to Tunisia, with 17 visits, as you can see from the chart. And the least were to Libya, only one visit to Libya, only one visit. It is also worth mentioning that Sudan has a special independent expert that concluded 26 visits to Sudan, and the latest visit was in April 2018. Now, moving to section 2, the COVID-19 situation in North Africa. Well, since the start of the pandemic in February, March 2020, the North African countries had witnessed different changes, same as what happened in the whole world. But just aside from the numbers and the scientific sides, let us try to understand what happened and how did the situation develop. Well, North Africa countries witnessed the development of the COVID situation after Europe and Asia. Thus, most of the countries tried to learn some lessons and took quick and strong proactive measures. That's why most of the countries, especially Morocco and Tunisia, had done well during the first wave and succeeded in controlling the virus. But what happened during the second and third waves? What happened in this region? Why did the data severely increase and the situation got completely out of control? This is the question that I will try to answer right now. Well, in most of North African countries, a high percentage of population depends on daily paid labor, which are not recorded in the official systems, thus do not have insurance. These percentages suffered the most from the lockdown restrictions during the first wave of the COVID-19. So after they suffered a lot, their voices started to rise up as they didn't find resources to afford buying food. Duly, the governments were threatened from the risk of rising anger of this large group. Also, were worried from the rise of the crime percentages as a result of the severe deprivation that those daily paid laborers were facing. I can say that the real challenges to the weak public systems in North Africa came during the second and third waves, where the countries couldn't implement strong restrictions that were implemented during the first wave because of the negative effects of those restrictions on the economies and what happened with the daily paid laborers that we just explained. And at that point, North Africa countries couldn't face the outbreak and the data started to become worse. In addition to the situation where the region's government had to choose either to save the economies or to save lives, the governments were facing additional challenges that motivated the escalation of wave 2 and 3. In a region with high poverty rates, citizens couldn't afford bearing the costs of buying the masks or sanitizers. So with less masks and sanitizers, infections were also getting higher. Thus, with less restrictions, borders opening, exhaustion of public health systems, the North Africa region witnessed severe waves by the end of 2020 till the middle of 2021, with high increase of cases and deaths in all countries. The vaccinations now are spreading in the North Africa region, however, still with low percentages till today. But before tackling the effects of the COVID-19 situation on the freedoms and so on, let us try to solve the mystery of COVID-19 in Africa. So, as I mentioned, the region faced less restrictions, borders opening, poor public health systems, but still the data and the numbers of the cases and deaths were low compared to the other regions around the world. So to solve this mystery, I found out 5 main reasons. The first one is the youth, because the African population has a majority of youth compared to Europe that has a majority of elder people, and elder people are most commonly facing death because of the COVID virus. So that's why the death data was low in Africa because of the youth population. The second point is the proper ventilation. Because most of the African countries are poor countries, they cannot afford heaters or air conditioning. So they spend most of their time in the fresh air outside their closed places, which is a good thing for the stopping of the spread of the virus compared to other regions where they usually use the heaters and the air conditioners and stay indoors. The third point is the trained immunity. So because, the African continent and including the North African region faced so many diseases and viruses, much more than the other regions, so they have a trained immunity that can deal with the viruses. Number 4 and 5 are the low testing and the low death records. So maybe the numbers were not low because the real situation is good, but simply because that there is low testing and low death records, simple as that. So now let us tackle the effect of COVID on human rights and freedoms in North Africa. Well, while the governments in North Africa are claiming to fight the spread of the global pandemic, freedoms in the region had extra restrictions. The governments in the region imposed health restrictions in addition to civil liberties restriction under the privilege of fighting the virus. Furthermore, the ongoing corruption in the region countries has been exposed after the failure of the health system to face the virus. As an example, in Morocco, around 25,000 including government oppositions, were prosecuted for violating the state of emergency. The lack of transparency about the virus situation, like in Egypt and Sudan, is considered a violation of the right to access information, especially in this critical time. The lockdowns prevented journalists and civil society activists from conducting on-ground research. The world's complete attention to the pandemic made it easier to violate the human rights. As an example, in Libya, strikes on civil entities happened with less attention from international community during the arising of the virus. Inequality was also present in the region during the pandemic, with prisoners and refugees left behind any sort of awareness, protection, or medication. Those two categories usually stay in overcrowded places, which put them in more risk. Migrant workers face inequality, as many of them have been forced to arbitrary dismissal from their jobs or were just not paid for months. In conclusion, and after nearly a year and a half from the emergence of COVID-19 virus, activists can say that the virus is not only dangerous on the health systems of the citizens, but also on their freedoms. It also appeared that the government's efforts to control the virus were not mainly in favor of the citizens, but either the favor of protecting their regimes. And this brings us to section 3, democracy and civic space. In this section, we will tackle 3 subsections. The first one is democracy, the second one is civic space, and the third one is press freedom. Let's go quickly to democracy. Based on the democracy index and the EIU data, which you will find with more details, of course, in the report, the North African region has been witnessing this line in democracy. Since 2016, only Tunisia had a flawed democracy. Only Morocco witnessed development, but still as a hybrid regime. All other countries, based on the democracy index, remain in the authoritarian regimes, with Sudan receding to the least category with less than 2, as shown in the chart. We can explain that by mentioning that there is a decline in good governance, resulting in serious backlashes to the democratic governance projects or programs. There is a decline also across the whole region in the civil liberties category, and as a result of the lockdowns because of the COVID, as we were just mentioning, the impact is increasing on the restrictions on personal freedoms, such as the freedom of movement. Talking about democracy in North Africa, we cannot talk about democracy in North Africa without mentioning the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring submerged so many parts in North Africa in 2011, starting from Tunisia, then going and erupting in countries like Egypt, Libya, and Sudan. This Arab Spring wave brought varying levels of change in the whole region. For example, Tunisia has witnessed a more inclusive government. Morocco has seen constitutional changes, which was a smart move. Islamists rose in Egypt, and so on. So many changes at this period of time. After all those changes, we can say that those changes were because the citizens' call for democracy rose between 2011 and 2013. However, after witnessing a series of instability and economic crisis, these calls were retreated. And that has led to the support of a percentage of the communities for the restrictions on democracy acts, which takes us to the conception of democracy in North Africa. So when there is a percentage of the community supporting the restrictions on the democracy acts, this gave the government an extra push towards controlling the civil liberties. As an example, 1/3 of citizens in North Africa believe that democracy is ineffective in maintaining stability. 4 in 10 think that democracy is uncertain. Almost every other person says that the people of their country are not ready for democracy. This may explain the rise and decline of democracy indicators in some countries in the period between 2011 and 2021. Moreover, the calls of overthrowing the regimes in North Africa ended up by bringing the rulers that could not handle this sensitive stage. Thus, after 10 years of the Arab Spring, we will find rulers nowadays with characteristics that were similar to those who ruled before 2011, of course, with some exceptions. Let me highlight that the Libyan case is a unique one because the external intervention and the political interest of its government had made it in the bottom in nearly all the indicators, including, of course, the democratic one. Simply, in a country that is facing war crimes and public markets for human trafficking, it is very hard to measure democracy. Now, moving to press freedom. Well, it looks like journalism is a tough profession in North Africa. Seeing the data in the Press Freedom Index, we will say that all countries have low scores, which means low press freedom in North Africa. Again, Maghreb countries have the best press situations in the region. The first one comes Tunisia, of course, then Morocco, then Algeria, as you can see from the chart. Sudan and Libya, again and again, also face violations to the freedom of expression. And Egypt is the most country in need to put more efforts to promote press freedom. If we would like to look at the bigger picture, we will find that the Press Freedom Index indicated that around 3/4 of journalism in the whole world is totally blocked or seriously impeded. Compared to the African continent, North Africa press freedom indicators are unsatisfactory. Western Africa, as an example, can be a good model to follow, with worst case of Benin scoring 38, However, in North Africa, 5 out of 6 countries scored above 40. So let us try and learn from West Africa region regarding press freedom. Compared to Asia, North Africa countries has an average score that is better than some regions like North and Southeast Asia, and also Central Asia, with countries scoring high press freedom violations as Turkmenistan, China, and North Korea. It is worth mentioning also in this point that the situation has increased in the light of the COVID pandemic, offering an additional excuse for more restrictions on information sharing in a time that citizens are in most need for proper information during a global health emergency. Finally, talking about civic space. Well, what can I say? Civic space is also shrinking in the region. In a region that civil society had a long history being at the bedrock of the struggle against colonialism and other forms of oppression. All civic spaces in all countries vary from closed, obstructed, repressed, with no countries having even narrowed civic spaces. Of course, with 0 open civic spaces, as you can see also from the chart. Even Tunisia, which is usually, has the best scores of the region regarding human rights, is described as obstructed civil space. The North Africa region is considered low compared to other African regions like Western Africa and Southern Africa. Let us start explaining this by mentioning that simply, civic space is the space in the society where citizens assemble freely and discuss issues of common interest to influence political, social, and economic life. But when terrorist activities rose in North Africa region, the space for human rights was limited to the state defense of human lives. However, more often, there has been a thin line between genuine counterterrorism initiatives and pretexts for political interests. The anti-corruption also drove states enough room to regulate the space of civil society. And again, here there is a thin line that has been blurred between real anti-corruption responses and pretexts. This can be summarily captured in the region, and we can say that civil society organizations has been shut down in North Africa regions with claim of foreign funding. The issue that has rose, especially after the Arab Spring, were the claims that those protests were motivated by foreign interests. Years after that, you can find that civil society working under the development umbrella are more than those who work on the political rights. The perception of civil society has changed as a result of that. Now, although most of, if not all the countries embraced multi-party systems and held periodic election and developed constitution that enriched civil and political rights for their citizens. In conclusion, for this part, we can say that formed part of democratization, there is still a suspicious look or vision for the civil society till now. The democratic privilege and its inherent contradictions opened up the public space for popular participation, but at the same time included inspection and interest. Finally, let us move to our final section, which is CSO international engagement on SDGs. Well, in North Africa, we do not have a specific sub-regional forum for SDGs because North Africa is usually seen as either part of Africa or part of the Middle East region. So I will present two forums that are considered sub-regional, and we'll have some recommendations on how North Africa region can have their own forums for SDGs. We do have two main forums. Let us start with the Arab Forum for Sustainable Development that is implemented by the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, and that started in 2014 in Amman, Jordan, and is implemented on a yearly basis in different Arab capitals. And of course, in 2021, it was implemented virtually because of the Corona situation. This forum is considered the primary forum of the region that is responsible for sending the key messages and the recommendations of the Arab region to the HLPF. That makes it a very important forum that should have CSO engagement on a high level. When I studied the CSO engagement in this forum, I found out that it is very regular. CSOs just register and can take place in the discussions, in the panel sessions or in the special sessions, but they do not have a specific sessions or specific mechanisms that allow them to actively and effectively participate in the forum, including the forum recommendations and visions that will be reflected to the international community and the HLPF. So the forum should work more on the CSO engagement. Moving to the second forum, which is the Arab Sustainable Development Week, organized by the Arab League starting from 2017. We can say that this forum is more casual because it does not present the recommendations to the UN or to the international community. It only has a report at the end that give some insights and sharing some experiences on how the region can support each other in implementing the SDGs, which is good. Having two forums in the region, one like a casual one and a primary one, will help in enriching the discussions on the sustainable development, and of course will provide more space for civil society to participate in sustainable development discussions. One point regarding the CSO engagement in this forum is that, a positive point, is that in this forum, civil society can actually organize sessions in the main agenda. So not only side events and special events, but they can organize full civil society sessions in the main agenda of the forum, which is considered, as I mentioned, a positive one. However, the forum needs more mechanisms on CSO engagements in the reports and the interventions, either written or oral ones during the official sessions or the sessions that are organized by diplomatic missions or governments. Those are where the two, and as I said, it is a good thing that we do have two forums, but they still need to have more space for civil society. Finally, moving to the recommendations. Well, I chose around two recommendations for each section that we were tackling today. And if you would like to take a look on more recommendations, kindly visit the report of the AADF 2021. So, recommendations on the SDGs. Well, recommendations to the governments, from my point of view, have to, number one, have more specific indicators. The specific indicators will help us to measure the real implementation of the Agenda 2030 in the countries. So having indicators will help us in monitoring the SDG implementation, which is very important. The second recommendation is prioritizing the SDGs based on the real needs of the communities. So till today, having severe challenges in SDGs 2 and 3 is not a good indicator for the implementation of the whole agenda. Going for the CSOs and recommendations for the CSOs, we can say that the CSOs in the North Africa region have to organize common SDGs forum in each country. So talking about the forums and the CSOs in engagement, I recommend that each country in the region do have a specific forum with common characteristics. And then the whole region, the North Africa region, can have a sub-regional forum discussing what has been happening in each country's forum. The second recommendation would be monitoring the SDGs in relation to civil and political rights at the same time or with the same level of monitoring the economic and social related rights. Now, recommendations on COVID-19. Again, starting with the government, we can say that the first recommendation will be being more transparent on the information and having more support to access to the data and to the information, because actually this will help a lot in decreasing the numbers of the cases, the infections and the death cases in light of course, increasing the vaccinations and increasing the vaccinations to the less privileged communities. The second recommendation will be having guiding principles to differentiate between virus control and freedom control. This is very important because obviously COVID-19 will remain with us as a guest for many years, upcoming years, so we have to do this. Recommendations to the CSOs will be first implementing awareness campaigns, because awareness is a strong tool of civil society that should be used today in this global health emergency. And the second recommendation will be motivating the private sector to handle their social responsibility, because again, this is the good time for the private sector to bear their social responsibility and help the government and the CSO in fighting this pandemic and to have collaborative efforts together. Recommendations on democracy. To the government, I want to recommend them to strengthen the public support for democratic principles by investing in civic education, which is in North Africa is very low. Civic education is very, very low, so this has to be strengthened. And second, strengthening the law that guard against foreign influence over government officials, because this is a major problem in Africa as a whole. Foreign intervention and foreign influence and external intervention, all of those expressions lead at the end to the same result, which is influencing the government officials not in the right way for the citizens. Recommendations on democracy to the CSOs is number one, forming collective support on a regional basis. You know, pressures on governments have very positive effects. So if CSOs in North Africa had a collective support together through an initiative or a mechanism, this can have a positive effect in a democracy implementation in the future. And the second recommendation to the CSOs on democracy is having more activities with the youth. As we mentioned, Africa has a very high youth population, so raising the awareness of youth on how to engage and how to participate in the democratic process, and even in some countries like in Sudan, in Libya, how can youth participate in the peace building processes so that they can have their own ideas reflected in the future of their countries. Finally, recommendations on CSO engagement regarding SDGs on an international level. For the governments, I would like to recommend them to increase the role of monitoring and evaluation of the CSOs. I would like to hear more about the participation of the civil society in the implementation of the SDGs projects or the formulation of the SDGs plans and reports. And secondly, including the outputs of the CSOs. So in many cases, the CSOs have done their homework and sent their input and sent their visions and key messages and everything, but at the end of the day, you cannot find them in their reports or in the future plans. And for the civil society, I would like to recommend them to present collective inquiries, to have, more spaces in regional and international forums, because regional and international forums keep saying the CSO engagement, but at the end of the day, you will find the spaces for CSOs to present their points of view and to reflect their vision is very narrow. So collective inquiry from North Africa CSOs to the forums may have a positive effect. And finally, sharing information among CSOs, because not all civil society organizations have the same information about the forums and about the United Nations and about the Arab League and how can I register to the forum, how can I talk in the forum, and so on. So I recommend that CSOs help each other in sharing the information and the details. I would like to thank you so much for listening and watching this presentation. This was a presentation on the North Africa region regarding defending and promoting democracy and civic space with SDGs in the framework of Asia-Africa Democracy Forum 2021. I thank you so much, and I remain available for any further inquiry. Thank you.